A psychopathic scientist fakes his suicide and then uses his invisibility to terrorize his ex-partner, who after the police didn't believe her story, decides to confront him herself. That's why today on the Summarizer, the Invisible Man. Cecilia, who is our protagonist, wakes up at dawn and goes to the bathroom to do something strange with some medicine and a glass of water. After this, she prepares a bag with her things and moves a security camera pointing it at the bed where Adrian was sleeping. Everything was going well, and she was moving around the house quietly, until suddenly she kicks the dog's food bowl. She immediately checks the camera, but Adrian is still sleeping peacefully. As she is leaving the house, the dog appears, and although she can't take him away, she at least takes off the electric collar in an act of heroism. But at that moment, the dog moves and hits the car, which triggers the alarm, and now Adrian must have woken up, or else he was deaf. She escapes, and we still don't know why. She went from sleeping peacefully to running away as if there was no tomorrow, to be picked up by her friend Emily, who, like us, doesn't understand anything.
What the hell happened here?
Suddenly, an unfriendly Adrian appears and breaks the window of the car. Then they get out of there as quickly as possible, and this man is left alone in the street, gathering some pills that Cecilia has dropped. And that's how this terrifying story begins. 2 weeks later, Cecilia turns up living with a man named James, as she tries to move on with her life. To get over the trauma, she goes out to the courtyard, but a suspicious man runs by, and Cecilia gets scared and goes back inside. The truth is that I would have been scared too. Emily reappears, and it's not all bad news. Apparently, Adrian is dead. But thinking that it's a horror movie and only 15 minutes have passed, this is impossible.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Adrian supposedly committed suicide, and we find out he was a specialist in technology and optics. Cecilia, for the first time, gets far enough away from the house and goes to get the letters from the mailbox. And in one of those letters, there's one for her. A court letter where Adrian leaves $5 million to her before he dies. As Cecilia is now a millionaire, she bought James a ladder. Yes, not a car or a house, a ladder. But at least she has the good deed of paying for design school for Sydney, James's daughter. Cecilia feels that someone is watching her, and thinking that the title of the movie is The Invisible Man, it is likely that there is an invisible man chasing her. Suddenly, the fire in the frying pan gets out of control and almost sets the kitchen on fire. And no, I don't think it was Cecilia's poor cooking skills, it was someone else who caused the fire. Cecilia was working on her computer when she feels again that someone is watching her, so she goes out to investigate around the house. She investigates, keeps investigating, turns on the lights, enters the kitchen, and suddenly the front door is open. She goes over to investigate and looks down the street, but there's nothing, so she goes back. But if we look closely, someone has just blown it. While she's sleeping, her sheet is pulled off and the light in the room blinks several times until she wakes up and sees a man. But relax, it was just a mannequin. Suddenly she hears a noise and turns around, looking as someone seems to be sitting on the couch. At that moment, the sheet is pinned to the floor as if someone was standing on it, until Cecilia falls down abruptly, and in fear she calls James, who tells her to just forget it. The next day, Cecilia goes to a job interview, and when she opens her briefcase, surprise, there's nothing in it. She starts to think that maybe someone took it out, and faints, ending up in the hospital. Once at home, she receives a call from the doctor who tells her that she fainted because she took too much diazepam, a drug that she doesn't take but that mysteriously appeared in her bathroom. And this dispenser had bloodstains since it was the same one that Adrian had picked up from the street at the beginning of the movie. For this reason, Cecilia goes to talk to Adrian's brother so that he stops stalking and following her. And there we learn that Adrian had told her that if she left him, he was going to find her anyway, being invisible. At this, the brother shows her pictures of the corpse and tells her that he is dead, that it's just a psychological issue for her. But Cecilia knew about Adrian's knowledge, and so she doesn't believe him. After this meeting, Cecilia goes to see Emily, and suddenly she tells her that she doesn't want to see her anymore, because she said some pretty nasty things in this morning's email, to which she tells her that she didn't send any email, that someone is following her and it could have been him. But Emily just tells her that she's crazy and closes the door. Cecilia goes back to her house, and in a moment, Sydney appears, who invites her to have a girls' night out and have fun to relax, when suddenly someone hits her. Then she thinks it was Cecilia, so she calls her father James, who decides it's best to take her away from our protagonist, and they leave the house. And now Cecilia is left alone in the kitchen and tells Adrian to show his face, to show up. For that, she fills the whole house with coffee to see the footsteps of our invisible man. On second thought, if Adrian doesn't kill her, James will kill her when he comes back and sees the mess she made in the house. After a few minutes with nothing happening, she decides to call him on the phone, and she hears that the phone is in the attic. So then, like any good horror movie, she goes to the attic with a flashlight to look for the phone and scares us for a while. When she's upstairs, she calls him back, and there appears Adrian's phone, totally out of place. And if that wasn't scary enough, we see that inside he has pictures of her sleeping. Next to it is a knife, the architectural plans that were missing from her briefcase, and other things. At that moment, she receives a message that says surprise, and then she goes to the attic door, and to see him, she cleverly throws white paint at him, and there he is. The invisible man is no longer invisible.
No way!
Cecilia starts following the paint stains with a knife in her hand until she no longer knows where he is. Suddenly, the faucet in the kitchen turns on. She goes over and turns it off. And yes, obviously something is going to happen now. Adrian starts to choke her, and after struggling for a while, she manages to get him off her, and runs out into the street until she asks for a car and asks him to take her to Adrian's house, the house we saw at the very beginning of the film. Once inside, she goes to the base of the house, where he has a kind of laboratory, and that's where Adrian's invisible suit is located. But while investigating the suit, the dog starts barking and Cecilia is no longer alone in the house, so then she decides to grab the suit and hide it in Adrian's closet. Although he manages to see her, she dodges him and incredibly manages to get out of the house. Cecilia arranges a meeting with Emily to tell her what she has just seen in Adrian's house, but once she tells her, suddenly a knife appears in her hand and she slits Emily's throat in front of everyone. At that moment, the police arrive and she is handcuffed for the murder which she supposedly just committed. With this, she is taken to an asylum, where she is tied up and sedated, and before falling asleep, she hears him say, "Surprise!" So we already know that Adrian is inside the room. The next day, they begin to interview her, and they tell her that she was pregnant, but she says that it couldn't have been, unless Adrian had done something without her realizing it. Cecilia is still hospitalized, and Adrian's brother comes to visit her, to tell her that all the money they were going to give her is now stopped, because she is hospitalized and is accused of homicide. And the interesting thing is that this man, who seemed like a nice person before, now offers her two options. Either she refuses all the money and lives the rest of her life in the hospital, or she has the baby and goes back to live with Adrian. And at that moment, Cecilia takes a pen, which she will use later on. When the doctor sends her away for the night to sleep, she, knowing that Adrian was going to be in her room, decides to take out the pen and threatens Adrian with suicide. So she begins to cut herself, until the invisible man appears, and she stabs him with the pen. With the noise, a rather useless policeman enters, who is quickly immobilized, and at that moment, more and more cops start to appear, and Adrian, already with the suit failing, finishes them all off. Cecilia manages to grab a gun, and goes out to look for him. Once she finds him, he controls her and threatens her that he's going to hurt those she cares about the most, like Sydney, James's daughter. And at that point, there is a turning point in the movie, as a cop sees them, so Cecilia is no longer so crazy. Adrian escapes and causes a crash, then our protagonist takes advantage and steals a car, Grand Theft Auto style. While driving, she warns James about the danger Sydney is in, so now everyone is going to James's house. Once Adrian enters the house, he begins to terrify Sydney, who in fear throws pepper spray at him, so Adrian hits the furniture but still manages to control it. Immediately, James appears, but he can't do much and ends up knocked out. Then now, Cecilia appears and cleverly uses a fire extinguisher to see him and shoots him 4 times in the body, enough to kill him. But no, it wasn't Adrian. The one behind the invisible suit was Adrian's brother, Tom. After this, the police go out to look for Adrian and find him handcuffed in the basement of his house. And while he wants to become a victim, Cecilia doesn't believe him, so she organizes a last supper to finish him off. Once they manage to get together, Adrian is repentant and says that he has learned from his mistakes, but Cecilia tells him that if he wants to have the baby, he has to admit everything he did. But when he doesn't, she goes to the bathroom, puts on the invisible suit, and murders him as he did his sister, Emily. That was The Invisible Man. Comment the movie or series you want for the next videos, and I'll see ya.
Okay, bye.